Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this third masterclass in the online masterclass series Urbanizing Deltas of the World, the state of the art of water research in South and Southeast Asia. In this masterclass series, we have invited PhD and postdoc researchers from various projects of the NWO Urbanizing Deltas of the World program who are presenting their research work and discuss their lessons learned from their research activities with you. Welcome. My name is Jaap Evers and I'm a lecturer at IHE Delft. Today's topic of our masterclass is adapting and innovating for managing and developing deltas. And we have invited two speakers. Our first speaker is Umme Kulsum. Her topic is supporting adaptive delta management with systematic exploration of community livelihood adaptation as uncertainty. And our second speaker is Dr. Thi Minh Hoang, and her topic is the roles of innovation in the Vietnamese delta planning processes. Our setup and schedule of today is similar like in the previous weeks. So we start with Umme Kulsum, and her presentation lasts for about 30 minutes. While she is presenting, you can leave your questions in the comment box, either on YouTube or Facebook, from where you are watching this and joining this masterclass. We, the organizing team, that's myself, Shanur Hassan and Leon Hermans, are collecting in the back your questions, and we are writing those down. And we are going to make sure that we forward your questions in our Q&A session. And our Q&A session is after our second speaker, who also is going to present her work for about 30 minutes. And then please also put your comments on her research work in the comment box. After both presentations, as mentioned, we have the Q&A session, and we are going to discuss your questions with Umme and Hoang. That's the schedule for today, and let me then introduce you, our first speaker, who is Umme Kulsum. And Umme Kulsum is in the process of finishing her PhD. Her PhD defense is scheduled in exactly 2 weeks from now on the 13th of October, and she did her PhD research at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands and the Institute of Water and Flood Management in Bangladesh. And she did that work in the NWO Urbanizing Deltas of the World project, Adaptive Delta Management, Development, Acculturation and Dissemination in Bangladesh and Indonesia. The research topic of Umme was supporting adaptive delta management, and that's also what her presentation will be about. And currently she has joined the FAO as National Climate and Change and Risk Management expert in community-based climate resilient fisheries and agricultural development in Bangladesh project. With that having been said, I give the floor to you, Umme, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaap. Welcome, all of you, to my presentation. My presentation is on supporting adaptive delta management, and I am waiting for the presentation to upload. Yes, it's now we can see. What do we see? We see a bridge under construction. A bridge is about connecting people of both sides. So my research is also about connecting people of both sides. That means the community people and the policy people. So my research is about supporting adaptive delta management with systematic exploration of community livelihood adaptation as uncertainty. I am, as Jaap introduced me, that I am a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management in the Delft University of Technology and Institute of Water and Flood Management in Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology. under the Adaptive Delta Management Project. My promoter is Professor Will Thyssen and Professor Shalom Khan, and also Dr. Eos Timmermans. Next slide, please. The presentation of today's discussion is basically the rationale of this research objective, research approach, and I'm presenting motor-based approach and reflection and scope of the contribution. Next, rationale of this research is basically our sustainable delta management in recent years is challenged with uncertain change in socioeconomy and climate. To deal with these uncertainties, Bangladesh is one of the countries moving towards adaptive delta management in its Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. The BDP 2100 strategic planning approach combines stakeholder engagement. However, the uncertain nature of adaptation decision making of local community, specifically under uncertain changing condition, remains unexplored. Historical evidence we see here from 1960 to 2500 shows that livelihood adaptation of local community in response to policy implementation can be at an uncertain direction. It's not always what policymaker plan. Here in this plan, that was the rice, the policy plan or policy emphasis was rice, but historically also shrimp cultivation was raised in different region. So that in this evidence, we see that, next slide please, that there is a the necessity to understand and explore how the community people, particularly farmers in the primary production sector, make adaptation decisions under changing conditions in their own social ecological system. So for that, we need an approach. What approach? That approach can capture the nature of the decision making of relevant actors, and also that how that decision making we can take account as uncertainty into the adaptive planning and implementation. Next. Therefore, my research objective is to develop an approach that can support adaptive delta management by systematic exploration of community livelihood adaptation as uncertainty for sustainable delta management. Let's discuss three key concepts at the research objective in brief. The key concept is uncertainty, community livelihood adaptation, and adaptive delta management. Then we will discuss the research approach. Uncertainty is a situation of inadequate information that can be due to lack of or imperfect knowledge, variability inherent to the system of interest, or ambiguity or plurality in framing the same decision problem in hand by multiple stakeholders. In this research, community livelihood adaptation is explored with an uncertainty perspective. Then what we consider community livelihood adaptation. Community livelihood adaptation is the adjustment in livelihood activities to mitigate harm or exploit benefits from changing conditions by a group of individuals or households that share material and non-material resources based on their differentiated capacity. And last one is the adaptive delta management, that is accept that the future is deeply uncertain, and that uncertainty can be due to climate change, due to socio-economic development, due to urbanization, vulnerability, even for social norms and acceptance. Instead of making a best prediction and developing a plan for the future, ADM asks what could happen in the future and what we can do now to achieve our goal, regardless of how the future unfolds. So, for this research objective, my research approach was basically a journey of discovery based on interdisciplinary concepts. So, in my research approach, I have three main phases. In phase one, I wanted to explore, is community livelihood adaptation is uncertainty or not. So that's why I explored historical importance, and then we found that yes, community livelihood adaptation can be uncertain, and then we go for developing approach design, testing case, and illustration with policy. Then we go for evaluation and conclusion. In our discussion today, we will focus on the MOTA-based frame scenario approach, a multi-method adaptive approach. In this approach, we used frame scenario method, MOTA framework as rational decision or action model, adaptation pathway, specifically to uh, present our result, and adaptive policy. We collected data from scenario workshop and interview. We have four simple methodological steps of this approach. First two approach is for conceptual model development, and the last two is for conceptual model application. So in the first step, we elicit knowledge, then that we interpreted data and model specified. We illustrate the model with policy implementation, and at the last stage, we identified livelihood and policy adaptation pathway. MOTA framework. Next, please. We used MOTA framework. In this MOTA framework of FEE 2015, that introduced the integrated relationship of motivation, ability, and trigger for action. This framework uses Fox behavioral model to enrich concepts from existing actor models for public policy analysis also. Let's introduce the MOTA framework, how community livelihood adaptation can fit into the MOTA framework, because it describes the choice of the community livelihood adaptation action as the causal consequence of triggers, motivation, and ability. Triggers are the event and or factors that cause actors to perceive opportunities or threats in terms of how a situation is contributing to achieve their aims or outcomes. The perceived opportunities or threats in turn influence the motivation of actors for specific livelihood adaptation actions. Here, outcome is the result of chosen action. So, with this exercise, we found that community livelihood adaptation can fit very well in the MOTA framework to develop further it for our model. Then for our model development and case application, we use rice and integrated farmers in polder 30 of southwest coastal region of Bangladesh. Uh, for data collection, we specifically use the next slide, please. Use the scenario development workshop and interviews. In the scenario development workshop, to identify uncertain situations for the scenario, we define it like that to the farmers. Here you can see the farmers, we are sitting together to develop our scenarios. What we ask, what factors, conditions, or trends are not in your control, or are not in control of your hand, but important for your agricultural decision making. Then farmers come up with a list of a list of issues. Then they really prioritize two factors. Then I ask, if we say that two factors, what factors you will choose? They identified two factors. We placed them into X and Y axis. Four storylines are developed from that scenario. And then finally, they also suggested adaptation plan for each scenario. We use, finally, they identified the key motivation and ability for adaptation decision. So when they identified the adaptation plan, then they identified what motivation and ability behind that one. So then we utilize that data for this conceptual model of MOTA framework. Based on MOTA framework, you see that the triggers, they identified external triggers: irrigation, water availability, water balance, agriculture technology, market system. So total four groups, two groups, integrated farmers and the rice farmers, they use these at external triggers, and then they also identify internal triggers, net benefit or loss. So we also put them here, and they also identify perceived opportunity as prospects of income, food for new crop or livelihood, and they think if it is low, motivation is low, high, and then they go for the actions. So they identified different actions on which main or alternative crop livelihood, adaptation or of technologies or varieties, and transformation of crop or livelihood. So their actions are basically in these three categories. And also their abilities is outlined there: investment capacity, physical and ecological resources, technical knowledge and experience, scope of livelihood, and access to formal, non-formal institutions. And as livelihood, it was livelihood sustainability or family food or income. So from the we got the MOTA model with a scenario and adaptation pathway, for ready for the adaptation pathway and scenario. Then we use this model with policy illustration. So we use policy implementation as a illustrative way. The policy was diminished. This policy was basically one policy from Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, and that policy was diminish drainage congestion with restoration of rural river canals and improve livelihood. For that, government has a basic plan to re-excavate rivers, canals, renovate gates, increase, repair the embankment, promote a saline resilient early variety and a new variety of rabi crops. Then we ask what would be the livelihood adaptation pathway and policy adaptation pathway. Then our result shows that livelihood adaptation pathway is really specific to specific conditions. So if the triggering condition is favorable for their rice cultivation, they usually go for rice cultivation. They if that favorable for shrimp farming, they go for shrimp farming. And integrated farming is they found it this cultivation is really favorable for all situations. And some they usually try to be adhere with the low tech, low cost technologies if there is they have enough resources. But though if the condition is favorable for them, that means if they have enough water, enough market facility, and everything, they don't usually go for shifting or adaptation to a new one. Even they said that tidal river management and raising care embankment, they will try to cope with raising care embankment as long as the situation is not so difficult or hard for them. So you see here as symbolic conditions. After 8, they go for after 7, they go for tidal river management. And also farmers cooperation is always feasible, and this farmers cooperative move to the advocacy to government for support if the situation or condition is become unfavorable. And if we see the policy adaptation pathway, if we want to follow the livelihood adaptation pathway, next please, next slide. Yes, this is the policy adaptation pathway. If we really want to follow the farmers adaptation pathway, then the policy adaptation pathway could be like this: that in a very favorable conditions, the policy should promote the existing cropping or land use change or shrimp farming is not very supportive at the where the situation is very suitable for rice cultivation. And also off-farm livelihood support is always feasible, and support agribusiness that is also suitable. And also as earlier one, dredging and excavation is a little, for example, is always suitable at the lower stage. But the tidal river management is really not accepted by the farmers or community if they have enough favorable conditions for their existing livelihood. And also the high tech or high cost irrigation is not adapted by farmers if they have irrigation facilities at low cost or just ground irrigation. So uh, that's the result of this conceptual one. Then we extended our MOTA-based approach, conceptual approach, to a computational model. So that was exploration how the MOTA framework can be extended to the computational model so that it can be a model to generate quantifiable result. So for that part, the case of rice and shrimp farmers in Polder 31 of southwest coastal region of Bangladesh is explored, and we try to compute of MOTA score for a livelihood action of an actor community at a scenario. So this computation is very specific to one scenario. So we have four scenario, but scenario can be many ways. Here we compute our motivation score and ability score. Motivation score, we found it as a function of triggering factors. Triggering factors, how the perceived opportunity and the perceived opportunity is normalized. And then we calculated the motivation score as triggering factors, and the then the ability factors. So in the ability factors, we calculate ability score, and this ability score is also a function of ability factors or perceived ability, and perceived ability was normalized, and then the ability score. Then we calculated MOTA score. There is two threshold, motivation and ability, because as per framework it shows that the threshold, there is a threshold motivation and threshold ability to for an specific action to be accepted by them. That's why we put a threshold level. Then we can see the computational flow diagram of livelihood. Next, next one, please. The computational flow diagram of livelihood adaptation decision was under a given scenario. So, in a given scenario, the computational flow diagram of decision like this, and we can get a score from triggering factors to the uh, for livelihood uh, decision uh, through MOTA score, and there is a ability score to be calculated, and if it meet the minimum ability score, then it can go to the MOTA score. So MOTA score is calculated as a motivation and ability score, and highest MOTA that got the highest MOTA, that can be preferred livelihood adaptation action. And if that doesn't exceed the minimum level or threshold level, then it can be the non-preferred or maybe possible non-preferred adaptation action. Let's see the next stage. It was scenario. We use scenarios developed by shrimp farmers. So for from shrimp one, we use the shrimp farmers one. So that was the triggering factor were irrigation water, saline water, agrotechnology, market system, industries. For these five, the four scenario, they have developed the alternate scenarios for flourish and water constraint, market constraint, and stagnant. So we use these for calculate our triggering factors. So we calculated motivation score of shrimp farmers for shrimp farming under water constraint scenario. So this is calculated like this. So here the irrigation, if the availability is low, then it can be perceived as, for a shrimp farmer, it would be perceived as good, uh, uh, because this is an opportunity for his shrimp farmer. uh, so then we put a value, and then it calculated like this, and we got a motivation score here upon a normalized one. And then we calculated the ability score similarly from six ability factors, as a function of six ability factors. And then we calculated MOTA score uh, from here, and for folder 31. So the MOTA score is, as it is water constraint situation, they preferred for shrimp. The shrimp farmers preferred for shrimp. Yeah, the different scenario here is basically four scenario: water constraint scenario, flourish scenario mean everything is available. The farmers need irrigation water, that is available, saline water, that is available, agrotechnology, that is available, market system, industries, all are really good conditions. They called it flourish situations. And if the water is low, then water constraint situation, then market constraint situation, and stagnant situations. That we defined this scenario. Then for livelihood, next one please. After ability score, so we calculated ability score from their interview data for the specific persons, and then we summarize for this. So then ability factors is calculated, and then we go for MOTA score. Next please. MOTA score calculation. So in 4.1, we uh, we tested it for five actions, that is rice farming, Robi crops, shrimp, industrial job, fellow. So how this response, then we saw that in this water constraint scenario, they still go for shrimp. This is for shrimp farmers. And we can see the result for four scenario in the next slide. In this slide, we can see the uh, result of shrimp farmers for the four scenarios. Specifically, in the four scenarios, the fish farmers result is that it is they will basically go for shrimp, fallow. If the situation is very difficult, then they can go for fallow, and also the rice farming in some cases at the stagnant scenario. But all three scenarios, they can choose the shrimp for any situation. But this is really different for rice cultivation. If we see the next one please. Yes, this is for rice farmers. So in this rice farmers model, we the MOTA score is really different for young and elder. We calculated as an example that yes, if the MOTA score can capture also the age difference perception of age or other social strata or not. For that, we differentiated young and elder decision making in farming. If we see that's the red one, that the orange one is for young and the green one is for elder, we see differences in even in similar scenario. Even the external condition is similar, the decision can be different for even the rice farmers, if they young or elder, and that can be different in based on different factors of their adaptation, of their ability and motivation. So this can show that what a constraint agro scenario, they usually the young rice farmers, they tend to go for shrimp or industrial job. If we see the first one, water constraint agro scenario, but the elder one, they don't really want to move to the shrimp or industrial job because they don't think their ability is that, they are not motivated. They are very much motivated to stick together rice farming or rabi crops. But in water available agro scenario, we see that uh, still there are water available water for all the young rice farmers. They want to move industrial job also, but the elder, they really want to stick together to the rice farming or rabi crops. And water constrained industrial scenario, where the water is very constrained but industrial opportunity is very good, then uh, then also it's different. Rice young want to shift to shrimp or fellow or industrial job, but the elder one, they want to try to rice farming or fellow or industrial job, if sorry, or fellow, that an industrial job, yes. And what are available in industrial scenario, in that scenario, the elder farmer is really want to industrial job, rabi crops and rice farming. So this is how it's shows that's the mota approach, that is based on motivation and ability framework. This really can be used as a decision making model for one. So if we reflect on the process, you reflect on the one. This approach can systematically explore community livelihood adaptation as uncertainty, which is applied in limited cases in our study, but it can assess further with wide set of communities with different characteristics. And next, please. This approach is more suitable for all livelihood domains. That means if we want to see all of the livelihood domain available for the farmers and what factors or how farmers choose livelihood adaptation, how farmers go to the livelihood adaptation, then it's a very good uh, approach uh, to understand and to realize. So future work can use the variation of methods, for example, data collection method, forward-looking scenarios uh, for this. And the next one, few level of detail in modeling the farmer's decision-making logic is explored. So as this was a very specific case, and we use very few level of decision-making logic, and also the uncertainty analysis was limited to uncertainties in triggers, but the impact of uncertainties in the model also need to be added, which is not in this. And given the purpose and context, the future work can find the most appropriate level of aggregation. So depending on our purpose and context, it can be decided, which is really true for all model. agent-based model. The mota-based logical relations can be transferred to the agent-based model. In this study, there is a number of logical relation is built with the equations and score calculations, and also conceptualized. So that can be used as a agent-based model that simulates the interaction between different actors. So that's a scope also. And for meta model, it could contribute to analyze the interactions of the socio-economic and human system with the physical system in an integrated way. If we see the triggering factors, most are external, and that is can come from physical system, can come from human system, and also they have ability factors and other. So that can integrate in an integrated meta model. Uh, so that's the, and also any other related model like delta dynamic integrated emulator model. Next, please. And I would like to reflect on the motivation and ability framework that I already said. We applied motivation and ability from framework as decision model, as a causal consequence of triggers, motivation, and abilities. First, this is the first application in Bangladesh confirms that MOTA is suitable in combination with adaptive approaches and ready to apply in combination with other approaches in policy design and implementability assessment. Next one. Developing future-oriented scenarios and adaptation responses together with actor, in our cases the farmers, suggest a serious game setting for awareness, co-design of adaptive policy strategy, co-creation of possible solutions over time. It was a really very good exercise when we say farmers that you can imagine anything uh, because we don't know how future will unfold. So then they really there was no bound. So they imagine different scenarios. So these will happen, that will happen. So that was really make them, allow them to think beyond the box, and they really identified uh, many different things, and that's really make them aware that yes, the future is uncertain, we don't know, anything can happen, so we need to prepare for that uncertain situations, and we need to prepare for that. So that's a really make them open to for co-creation of possible solutions. So that's a really good, can be a good serious game. uh, Next one, please. Yes, and I think this is the last one. Practical application is highly recommended of this approach, which specifically require an adaptive perspective. This is really very hard. Adaptive perspective of policymaker, planner, and implementing agencies. If we can switch to the adaptive perspective, yes, the future is uncertain, and we need to be adaptive. We need our policy, our planning, and implementing agents, implementation need to be adaptive. That's the key things and key message from this at the last. So thank you. Next one is, yes. So thank you all for for your patience.
Yes, thank you, Umme, for your interesting presentation. There are already several questions in the comment box, and let me invite the audience to continue to share your questions with us, which you have with Umme. There are already some questions that are relating to the formulation of the policy adaptation pathways, and maybe you could already start thinking about also how this is useful for the cooperation between local governments and communities in developing sustainable livelihoods or sustainable systems to be adaptive maybe to a changing environment in the delta. So thank you very much, Umme. That was very interesting. Our next speaker is already on your screen is Dr. Thi Minh Hoang, and she successfully defended her thesis, which I actually have here, and which is a very interesting read. She defended her thesis, The Roles of Innovation in Strengthening Strategic Delta Planning Processes, at Wageningen University last June. The topic of her presentation is Roles of Innovation in the Vietnamese Delta Planning Process, and her research was done in the NWO Urbanizing Deltas of the World project, strengthening strategic delta planning processes in Bangladesh, the Netherlands, Vietnam, and beyond. I was myself also part of that project, so it's very nice to see you here now again, Juan, online for you to be able to present your work. So Huang researched the role of innovations in delta planning, and the Mekong Delta Plan, developed in 2013, introduced several new ways for land and water use, including innovations such as adaptive livelihoods and interprovincial coordination. Innovation aspects for nature-based livelihoods have been studied for livelihoods in different agroecological regions of the Mekong Delta, the upper region in the coastal region, and one of those examples is flood-based floating rice and coastal-based mangrove shrimps. Huang made some observations from her local respondents on those livelihood models and what their preferences are. One of those innovations is lotus farming, for example, which is a potential alternative for triple rice in the floodplains in the Mekong Delta. And it's an interesting innovation regarded by many groups in the Delta. That's one of the things that I think Huang is going to talk about in her presentation. As mentioned, if you still have questions for Umme on her work, please share them in the comments. And of course, if you have questions for Huang, also share those in the comment boxes. Then I give now the floor to Huang. Thank you for being here. And the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot, Jaap, for a very kind introduction, and especially on of the support of the whole team behind the computer, Shanur, Laura, Leons, and many others. I have been very much enjoying watching on previous Masterclass series sessions since the beginning. And today I and Umme will take our turn to present our work to you. And as Jaap already mentioned with you, today I am talking about my content. The content of my PhD research would focus on the role of innovation in strengthening strategic delta planning process. The case studies is in Vietnamese Mekong Delta. Actually, my promoter is Dr. Peter Hellegers. My supervisor is Dr. Gerardo van Hansemer. And of course, we cannot have done this without their, of course, wholehearted support. So let me take you firstly to my overview of the presentation. I will introduce to you the research site, the Vietnamese Mekong Delta. Next, I will bring up the key component of my analytical research framework, strategic delta planning approach. Innovation is one of the main input for my analysis. Next, I will talk about research methodology, the process of master planning in the Mekong Delta. And as Jaap already said, lotus farming as an alternative for triple rice. And in here is technological innovation. And I will wrap up by some key conclusion. Then for this, I will briefly go through the introduction of the case study, the Vietnamese Mekong Delta. I believe that many of you have been familiar with the name the Mekong Delta, because it has received extensive attention for many research recently. So as you may know, the Vietnamese Mekong Delta, which is located downstream of the Mekong River. So for this location, it possesses both advantages and disadvantages. And for the strength it is considered as unique in its biophysical dynamic entity. It is rich in ecosystem, water, and natural resources. This trend has made the Mekong Delta as a top second exporter of rice all over the world, and also a rice bowl of the whole country contributes 52% in the total rice production, and as such is play a role of a pillar of the country's food security. In contrast, the location downstream of the Mekong River also brought to the Mekong Delta many challenges. For example, the upstream activities like dams construction, hydropower development, etc., in together with the expansion in agriculture and aquaculture, has exacerbated the vulnerability of the Mekong Delta to climate change. And we have known about this in our previous sessions of this masterclass series. Also in recent publications and reports for about the land subsidence of the Mekong Delta, which is very serious groundwater problems, and also some unpredictable occurrence of extreme climatic events such as saline intrusion, the soil erosion, drought, annual floods, and or even the sea level rise. In facing these challenges, the Mekong Delta manager and government has called for more adaptive strategies, and they themselves have also to bear responsibility of doing things differently, like would have to be different than what have been done before in the past, because those were proven as ineffective to the challenges, and not sufficient to respond to those challenges. So in line with these changes in thinking and in ways of doing things, or let's say the reorientation of planning, we take a look at the strategic delta planning approach. From now on, I will in brief call it an SDP, which was used as a main analytical theoretical foundation in my PhD research. For me, it is a promising planning approach to develop strategic plans. Those plans are annexed to link to actions and means for implementation in the long-term frame, like 50 to 100 years instead of 5 to 10 years, like our conventional master planning cycle have been done so far. As defined by Cycle, one of our project fellows, or also one of the pioneers in initiating the usage of the Hourglass framework, as you can see in the slide. The SDP process is a public-led sector with a process through which a long-term vision, actions, and means for implementation are produced that shape and frame what a sustainable delta is or may become. But the SDP process is not a linear process. It is actually a discontinuous process with many stops and starts. It is different from the conventional planning approach, which according to some scholars are described as fragmented, sectoral, targeted dictation, lack of integration, etc. This SDP is actually integrated, as it engages many sectors and involves many stakeholders. It covers many domains from social, institutional, and financial issues as well. So the aim of the SDP is to influence and guide future development towards sustainable delta development by making strategic choices and decisions. So take a look at the Hourglass framework. This framework was used to visualize the strategic delta planning process, as it can differentiate the three phases of the SDP process, including the first phase is a agenda setting phase, where people put on the table their interest or the problem need to be solved, and also including some innovative solutions, or I call it innovations in my study. And those innovations are expected to gain the consent during the negotiation process in the second phase, plan formulation phase. And if those innovations already successfully pass through these two phases, and it can be served at a frame for for future projects or programs or action plans in the implementation phase. So then we have to note here that these phases in reality are not explicitly distinguished, not linear as we can see in the picture. The red circles showing the innovation component in this SDB process. So what is innovation? Innovations. Theoretically, innovations, according to Dewar, it is an idea, practice, or material artifact that is perceived as new by the unit that adopts it. They are proposed in many countries to support the changes towards a more secure future. In terms of the degree of newness, we have two types of innovations. The first one, radical, means it is a revolutionary change, or incremental one is making a minor improvement on current technology. Although innovative ideas may belong to an individual activity, the inventing and implementing them is actually a collective achievement. So in this sense, innovation process is in fact a co-evolution process stemming from the alignment of technical, social, institutional, and also organizational dimensions. In this thesis, we focus on a radical technological innovation in strategic data planning process because those are required to enable the changes that are deviated from the past planning practices. The innovations that were selected for my analysis are basically proposed by the MDP. For example, the introduction of something new that is altered by something already established. In my case, is for example, the floating rice or lotus farming, or the innovation entail new idea or way of doing something new that has not been practiced yet before in Vietnam. For example, room for the river, and or practiced a long time ago and now become the subject of renewed interest. In my case, it's a swim mangrove integration model. As such, we set out our hypothesis that innovation can engender consent among stakeholders as long as they are multifunctional and thus can attract different interests of various stakeholders. So to bridge the knowledge gaps in existing literature, here in this thesis, we try to explore the roles of innovations that was mentioned in the first phase of the outclass, how they will travel through all three phases of the SDP, and after all, how important it is in inviting the stakeholders, which is in reality is hard to achieve. And if so, which role of the innovation can maintain this consent among stakeholders over time. To achieve the research objective and answer the research questions, we apply some key methodologies. So you see here on the right, the structure of my thesis. This is the key methodologies. So we already applied literature review, interview with some key informants who sit at high position in the Vietnamese political system. And for analyzing the conversions or diversions of the agendas, we adopted the multiple stream approach. The case study was used to analyze soft implementation of the SDP and also for analyzing four specific innovations. We also use stated preference as the only quantitative method throughout the entire research to see how the community, including residents and non-residents, prefer the innovations. The finding will be qualitatively confirmed by the the Millennium Assessment Framework to evaluate the multifunctionalities of the innovations according to the combination of services they provide for the society. Finally, we use historical approach via social construction of technology lens to see the development journey of an innovation. Let's say in here, we take out the lotus farming as an example for this case, and also it represents a technological artifact, according to Scott. for the master planning process in the Mekong Delta. Over the past 40 years, the Vietnamese government has prioritized agricultural development with a focus on intensive rice production in the Delta to ensure food security for the whole country. So, around 1975, uh, the time of renovation, or in Vietnamese we call it đổi mới period, the planning was mostly to spur agricultural production. The planning was development targeted and for 5 years planning oriented. However, such a focus was no longer like sufficiently responding to the economic goals of local community. Neither does it address the challenges of climate change and the pressures of human intervention. That's why the NADECO Master Plan in 1993 was developed to boost economic development. It was more integrated then, with more than 100 projects, mostly for in water sector and irrigation system. And now the arrival of the Mekong Delta Plan, which I already mentioned as my main input for the whole analysis. Now we talk about the implementing the Mekong Delta Plan. The Mekong Delta Plan, as remarked by Hassan, also one of our project fellows, that the concept of innovation entailed in the Delta planning knowledge travel well to Vietnam under making waves process, a process of trial and error, adapting and adapting. As such, the MDP can be considered as a paradigm shift for policymakers, governmental entities, and the Delta managers in Vietnam. And from now I will call Mekong Delta Plan in brief MDP. In fact, it is not a master plan as we could normally think of. Instead, it is a vision for a long-term time horizon. As I already mentioned, it's 50 to 100 years. It is an instance of the SDP as it's introduced new ways of thinking or planning and different from the conventional way. It's sectoral and ministerial and lack of integration, so on and so forth. Initially, the Mekong Delta Plan was originated from the Dutch Delta Planning. It was developed and tailored to the Vietnamese context with support of the Dutch expert and then also Vietnamese expert. It includes some scenarios for a sustainable development of the Mekong Delta, and those scenarios including, like for example, agribusiness and sustainable livelihoods that I already use for all of my innovation selection. For example, the flood-based livelihoods. So now I'm taking an example of this flood-based livelihood, which is lotus farming, and in our case, it is an innovation. Here in this figure, I am telling you a story about the development of lotus farming in Thap Moi district, Dong Thap province. You see in the figure before 1975, the region was like other regions, suffer from the negative consequences of the long-lasting war. At that time, everything was being recovered. The soil condition then was really bad, very sulfide acid and not suitable for growing rice. So local farmers then already spontaneously planted lotus for collecting seeds, but the use then was low. And then after 1980, or from 1980 to 1990, Taiwanese people came to the area and initiated commercial lotus market with the intention of expanding it to the international oriented market. Then they invested with both seed sources and finance, like money, to raise up the quality of lotus products. However, this sponsor did not last long because they set out a very high standard for the lotus seed quality that the local condition could not meet or satisfy. Then what happened? The Taiwanese actor left. After this actor stepped out of the game, The local farmers was inspired by what have been done. They try to maintain the lotus model, and actually new actors already step in, as you can see in the figure. 1994, local farmers and external traders, which are only individuals. In 2000, more actors come in, like Shachi Vietnamese company and a group of Vietnamese students from Ho Chi Minh City who contributed to diversify the types of conducting lotus. So then not only intensive lotus, but we have seen more than that, like lotus rice, lotus fish, and most importantly, lotus ecotourism. We see next the important actors join in, like the local authorities, scientists from Kung University, international development partner like IUCN, who under the sponsor of Coca-Cola Foundation have been coming for many support to pilot what we call it sustainable livelihoods to adapt to climate change. So the more interventions from other actors into the arena, the diverse perceptions toward redesign the lotus technologies was found. Actually, many difficulties was also detected that made up serious hurdles to multiply or replicate the model. Uh, those hurdles include undefined disease. Those are strange disease that for a long time people could not find what is the cause or how to solve this, and the unstable market and price, and we have lack of labor sources and the uncertain will and hope from local farmers. They are already tired of these difficulties and already switched back to rice, so on and so forth. But we have observed a potential development of lotus farming as an innovation. We see the stabilization among some social relevant groups. For example, the authorities, they have a very nice perceptions or framing for lotus farming. So we see with new interventions of the new actors who step into the games, the lotus technology was again renegotiated, redesigned, and remodified so that the meanings of lotus farming could be adapted and satisfied these new interests of the new actors. Um, some key messages from the case analysis of the lotus farming. First, lotus farming was locally initiated with the starting point for development as to resolve the soil problems. But since the more actors involved, the perceptions of stakeholders for lotus farming became more diverse. For example, if local farmers has their interest on lotus farming as bringing a better income, the authorities tried their effort in protecting lotus as a symbolic beauty of the region. They also have the name for this beauty. It's Sheng Hong Dong Tap. Then it is like pink lotus in Dong Tap. The scientists in another side, they look at lotus farming as a way to cope with flood, and UCN differently, they look at lotus farming as a sustainable life alternative for livelihoods instead of intensive rice, like triple rice, etc. But in the arena, we found a missing of private sector, which is into place. But most important actors was found as the international partners, as I have talked about, IUCN, local officials and scientists who bring up the motivation for local farmers to continue to maintain the lotus models by either this way or that way to support. Then for some key conclusions of my entire thesis. The first finding is about conversions or diversions of the political agendas. We found, first of all, that the interview data provided strong evidences for convergence between the agenda set by the MDP and the Vietnamese policy actors, although a slight divergence was also found. Further evidence to support the convergence is provided by, of course, the Prime Minister's formal endorsements of the decision like 593 and the Resolution 120, which contain many ideas of the MDP. And since the convergence occurred due to the negotiation of the consent for the MDP, the diversion occurred due to the negotiation of the regional consent. We found here the crucial role belonged to the policy entrepreneurs who already like mentioned in the previous slide, including scientists from CTU, the Country University, international development partner, also some important ministries, including Monterey Mark, and the most important one already like abolished the Southwest Steering Committee. Those are the main advocates to push up the implementation of the MDP. They narrow down the divergence of agendas over time by constantly taking actions over all stages of the political process, and thus they try to merge the three political streams and in order to achieve the convergence. And for the SDP, we found that although the SDP process takes time, in our case, at least 4 to 5 years, from 2013 to 2017, and not yet a finished process. In fact, it's traveled well to and in Vietnam. By generating prospects for change in delta management and offering new ways of thinking about what a sustainable delta is, it has changed the mindset of Vietnamese political actors. And this finding is very important in the sense that in order to get a new strategic ideas or innovation enter a hard implementation, it has to first enter the soft changes in thinking. We call it soft implementation. For example, in order to implement like new strategies at the livelihood level or in agricultural practice or in flood control, these new ways of doing things need to be accepted and appreciated by the policymakers and also the practitioners. So here we emphasize that soft aspect of implementation cannot be overlooked, especially in the rigid and top-down political system like in Vietnam. It means if we look at the Outclass framework, the proposed innovation in the first phase, in order to be translated into project in the third phase, like implementation phase, it needs to pass through the second phases, which is plan formulation. In other words, it has to be convinced and approved and appreciated by involved stakeholders around this phase. We call it like negotiation phase. Without this shift of thinking, a hard implementation will be very difficult to begin. So in a close connection to this, we then found a usefulness of the Outclass framework because it's not only can visualize the SDP, like three phases of the SDP process, it can also include the invisible aspects such as the self-implementation, which is very pivotal in this whole process. So now talking about the innovation itself. First, we found that innovation plays a perfect role as a consent builder, as it could bind a broad spectrum of stakeholders to agree on a specific choices. This can be seen in the case of floating rice and also the lotus farming. More importantly, the appreciation was found mostly widely among grassroots stakeholders like farmers and local authorities. These are direct or indirect beneficiaries and the end users of the outcome of strategic choices. Their voice and aspiration do matter. In the case of floating rice and lotus farming, Oh, sorry. In the case of floating rice and room for the river, we found that the multifunctionality emerged as a crucial characteristic for the uptake of innovation. Then, in the case of the analysis of lotus farming as a technological artifact via the Scotland, we have found that innovations are socially constructed. It is not a fixed artifact, but rather it is modified. Oh, sorry. It is modified and redesigned and is renegotiated, adapted in order to meet the new request or new demand of the development process and of the society as the new players will step into the game. So the modification in the technology design should be changed accordingly to satisfy them. So we conclude that innovation is co-evolved with the planning process. Some requires more integrated conceptualization spanning many domains. For example, the room for the river has to span from, for example, spatial planning, livelihood, water management, flood control, so on and so forth. Then I would like to end up my presentation here. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for the later on the comments. I will try to address them in my ability. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Huang. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. Then we are also continuing to our question and answer session. And what I find interesting of both um, your and Umme her presentation, and I learned that Umme is now only in audio with us to save some bandwidth in her internet connection. Is that adaptation and innovation is it's both a bottom up and a top down process, and they interlink. And what is also interesting, I think, is that innovation and adaptation, the the artifact, the technology, or the way of working itself is also influential to that process. Um, I would like to first go back to one of the questions that were posed to Umme in relation to how you did formulate those adaptation pathways. And it might relate also to one of the questions that popped up in the comment boxes. Um, if the research and the what is research is actually in the need of the farmers, or is it in the interest of the researcher? So maybe Umme, so could you give a little bit of further insight on how these adaptation pathways were developed and how useful it actually is then in the practice of adaptation?
Okay, that's a really good to focus on and in depth. The adaptation, when we specifically at the first of my research, when we investigated for historical adaptation in that region, we found that many adaptation strategy is basically selected by farmers, and they have their own choice. And when a policymaker or any interventions go with a adaptation strategy, that adaptation strategy, as for example, sweet corn cultivation, that can be one of many options in front of farmers. So when a policymaker come with adaptation strategy, that's not really the only one option for farmers. So that's how in my model development and also a further model exploration, we use that perspective. Yes, if there is a 10 choice for farmers, then how they select, what factors influence them to select which adaptation strategy they will choose. Then based on this theme, that model was prepared. and that was the study. And that the researcher, as a researcher, this interest is grows basically from the farmers' interest. So there is a alignment of farmers' interest and researcher interest, and also we find gap many ways. That's the when the policymaker make a design of adaptation strategy that might not be feasible or suitable in which conditions farmers are at this moment. So that's from that perspective, we first we develop the farmers adaptation pathway from the farmers interview and farmers data, and then we our policy development pathway or policy adaptation pathway is basically the exercise from the farmers livelihood adaptation pathway. So that is really shows how policy need to be adapted based on the conditions and based on the farmers need or priority over time over conditions. So I think that's answer the question.
Yes, thank you very much. And this is then a question, I think, for the both of you, but let first give one opportunity to answer. Um, how is then, based on your research, what kind of recommendations would you then give to local government to actually support either the implementation of the innovation or adaptation pathway?
You asked me, yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. I also slightly mentioned a little bit in my talk that we miss one important actors in the arena, which is private sector or enterprise. So I think the local government or authorities should take some initiation to attract them into to involve them into the game by some kind of like official or formal scheme based on our legal framework. For example, they can have subsidies or tax reduction or kind of having support like easier in administrative activities or something. So then the involvement of the potential actors can be easier to be done instead of getting too many hurdles in making papers work or something. Now in Vietnam this is still really troublesome when if you want to have a paper or something to initiate some kind of official business or something. So that's what I can have in mind, but I don't know if it's practical or not because it's Vietnamese political system is still top down and really rigid, and it's mostly we cannot change it in a, one night or some short time.
Yes. Thank you for your insights, Huang. Could you further explore your recommendations, Ume? So, what would you advise
Yes,
to
yes,
local authorities?
yeah. First, and my final recommendation was in my presentation uh, is for adaptive perspective for our policymaker. The main constraint in adaptation is that we are in our future is uncertain and we can't stick to one strategy or one adaptation or one activity for each and every farmer in one region. So that's need to be understood by our policymakers, and policy recommendations should be that's the we need a adaptive perspective that the in different farmers can be in different situations. They can be their factors, their priority, their situations can be different. So we need to take into account that their adaptation priority and their livelihood priority in our policy making. In adaptive delta planning or adaptive delta management, specifically, we are really very focused on the physical system uncertainty. So yes, there is climate change. There is other physical phenomena. So how we can model that, how we can make a good make scenarios of that. But this is also our society is also in social response is also uncertain. So my recommendation to policy is that we need to further explore that if we want to make our farmers more adaptive and make our adaptation initiatives successful.
Thank you. In your presentation, you also mentioned, and you have analyzed that, a difference between the elderly farmers and the younger farmers, and that there is a higher interest also among young farmers to actually go for industrial jobs, or at least jobs outside of agriculture.
Yes,
Um, and I wouldn't be surprised if you might have find also similar kinds of observations in the field, Huang, in the in the Mekong Delta. What would that actually then mean for sustainable development and adaptation and innovations? Either one might say, okay, younger people are more into innovations and doing something differently maybe than their parents, but that differently might also be outside of farming. And what does that then mean for sustainable development? Uma.
yes. That's really true. The younger are more prone to go for innovation and for the industries. But in one of my other observation, they said if we have the modern technology for agriculture, that also we can do that. But they are really thinking of innovations and thinking of new areas where they in the agriculture sector also they said that yes, at this moment the rice cultivation and agriculture activities as a traditional system is not really viable for us. We that's It's not profitable due to different disasters and other problems. But if we have more skill, we can gain more skill for industries and other areas. So that's one issue. And another issue is that the elder are more prone to rise because they thought this is their traditional one, and as they don't know any other thing, this is this is what they can do. So yes.
In
Yes,
my
thank you, Uma and Huang. Do you want to contribute?
yeah, in my case, I found a gap between elderly people and younger people, because I mean, like, okay, the elderly people, the old people who hold traditional knowledge, as you also one of the questions also mentioned, and those are really valuable because they accumulate those experiences from practice and in reality, and they already innovate themselves in every like daily practice for agriculture or also aquaculture activities, and those knowledge are I think it should be really good to take them into account when we have some ideas for innovations or something. But those knowledge is hardly found in the younger people. I think now the young generation are they have the newer motivation for them to how say to make up their career instead of attaching themselves into the traditional agricultural activities from ancestors or from even from the previous generation. And you also know about the issues of migration in the Mekong Delta, and most of the young people already move out of their hometown and move to industrial developing provinces or country or cities like Ho Chi Minh City or Bình Dương province, where industry sector is really developed, and I think they found themselves there more than uh, adhering to agriculture activities in their hometown. So I think it's also a problem.
Okay, thanks. Final question, because we are almost reaching the end of our master class. Adaptation pathways and adaptive thinking, of course, is also introduced to be able to um, already respond to expected climate change, and rather than to wait for climate change to happen, that we are already in advance adapted. If we are looking at many research, also especially around accelerated climate change, basically we see that we are still running behind the facts. So in order to realize our objectives for 2030 in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. Based on your research, do you see that local communities, either in the Polder 30 or in the Anyang, where the in the Mekong Delta, are they running behind facts, or are they running on time, or are they already adapted towards a changing world, or is this something out of their scope in changing?
Oh, because you mentioned about Anyang province, so I think I will take my turn to answer this question. I think because there is intervention of scientists into like local level already, so they made of some like kind of like courses or trainings. They raise awareness for farmers community. So I think now farmers are no longer only interested in income and the short-term benefit. They already expand themselves into more like aware of the impact of climate change, and also how to deal with the flood, the unpredictable occurrence of flood, and they know how to employ the knowledge into their okay, I thought I am lost. So I think they already have improved in their knowledge, and they already know how to incorporate the adaptation concept into their agricultural activities. I don't know why my screen always gone.
Yeah. Some final
Yeah,
words for
and I
you
want to
also,
give the
Ume?
floor.
It's me? Okay.
Yes.
So, yes, in polder 30 and polder 31, as the farmers are observing uh, changes over years, they have gained some knowledge, and they have developed their own strategy, and also many organizations and government has many interventions, adaptation interventions in that areas, that in certain levels they are in progress. But the reality is that the environment and the changes sometimes in some places are so abrupt, it might not be sufficient for next years or next some years. Maybe they need to rethink. But yes, they have indigenous knowledge. They already are developing how they can go to the integrated farming. They can save their own hairs or own ways at a certain level, certain height of the water level, or certain increase of temperature change. Then what they will do, that need to really rethink and work together by the policy, because Bangladesh government has some policies in the Bangladesh Delta Plan uh, that need to find how that can meet the farmers' need of now and future. Then we can say that's the climate. We are climate resilient, and we are ready for the our uncertain future. So that's the final.
Thank you, Ume, and thank you, Huang, for both your presentations and sharing your knowledge and research work with our audience. Based on the questions, I see that it's much appreciated. So thank you. Feel free to also give maybe some more replies or connect to people in the audience to further discuss your work with them. Then I'm closing
Thank
this
you.
masterclass of today. And I would like to pay attention to the next week's masterclass. So maybe also that can be put on screen. Next week's masterclass is our last one in this short series. And the topic of the masterclass is rethinking Delta knowledge and moving forward. We have, as usual, we have two speakers, which is Dr. Rugnu Ferdous and Dr. Shanur Hassan, who are going to share their knowledge with them and with you. And we are, of course, starting at 6 October at the same time as we have also started today. If you would like to have more information on this masterclass series, go to our website, and maybe you can do that via your favorite search engine, and then search for UDW Masterclass series and add IHE Delft to it, and then you are there. I'm going to thank you very much for having joined us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you back online and next week. Thank you very much.